Okay, here we are, the second episode of Star Trek Picard. It is Maps and Legends, and the episode opens with a flashback to the Utopia Planitia shipyards on Mars, 2385, 14 years ago. Apparently, the shipyards are on the planet's surface. That was never previously established on Star Trek. They were always in orbit. I think they're partially maybe on the surface now and in orbit, but this is since J.J. Abrams' Trek in 2009. They have this fixation with starships being built on the planet's surface. So the Enterprise was being built in that film on the surface. I don't know why. This makes no sense. Starships would be built in orbit. That would just make so much more sense from a logistical and practical perspective. So anyway, there's all these synthetic life forms, these androids working alongside the human beings at the shipyards. And for some reason, again, as I mentioned in the first episode, the dialogue is all 21st century millennial. So it's like, yo, dude, and hell yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah. What is this? What the hell? This is not how anyone ever spoke on TNG, DS9, or Voyager. Why would they speak like this? Why, in the 25th century now, why has our speech in the future regressed suddenly back to that of the 21st century? Why? Everybody's speaking in a very contemporary way. So anyway, this guy, F8, goes postal and kills them all and then kills himself. There's some kind of an android uprising, and I guess this is a prelude to the events that took place on in the short trek, which was Children of Mars. And by the way, there's some swearing, twice actually, in this episode. The word shit is said, and there's also an F-bomb dropped. So after the opening credits, which I officially hate because they are very reminiscent of Star Trek Discovery, we go back to France, the vineyard, once again, which is already starting to get old. Can we please have some Star Trekking already and get off the planet's surface and go into space? The show is called Star Trek. But no, this very, 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 very slow plot, gradually being stretched out over several episodes. I should point out that the plot doesn't really advance much in this episode. There really isn't much development whatsoever. We don't really learn all that much that we didn't know already in the first episode. Basically, nothing happens. All right? It's just a bunch of talking and a hell of a lot of exposition. And we find out that the Federation are really, really dementedly evil now. It's just like completely the antithesis of the philosophy and the vision of Gene Roddenberry. So it's anti-Star Trek. That's what we're watching now. So anyway, Picard is looking at some footage that was recorded of the fight, or the fight that we can't actually see because apparently Daj is omitted now. She's deleted somehow from all the footage. It just makes no sense to the security camera footage. But we see the explosion on the rooftop and Picard being thrown back in an explosion that would most definitely, a man in his 70s would not survive. But he's there with his two Romulan friends whose names I can't remember. Because it's just like with Star Trek Discovery, all the new characters are so forgettable you can't remember their names. And the female Irish Romulan, and she is actually an Irish Romulan. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But she starts talking about, who could be behind the secret operations on Earth. And she suggests that it could be what's basically a Section 31 type organization within the Tal Shiar. Right? They keep doing this kind of thing. As the guys over on Red Letter Media pointed out, since the J.J. Abrams films, the people running Star Trek have a massive hard-on for Section 31. And that's what Secret Hideout was doing with Star Trek Discovery. And they're just out in the open now because they kind of think that Section 31 on Discovery were kind of like the CIA or the NSA or something, when actually they're far more clandestine and secretive than those organizations. But that's what they consider them to be like, I suppose, because they don't know Star Trek and they probably only, in passing, heard about them on Deep Space Nine, or if they watched the Deep Space Nine episodes with Section 31 in them, they didn't really understand what Section 31 was. The character of Sloane was incredibly mysterious. Section 31 were not centralized in one place. They didn't even have their own ships that we know of. Right? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. We didn't know. Bashir would wake up and Sloane was at the end of his bed. And then he'd walk out the door. Bashir would run out after him and he'd just be gone. And there'd be no trace. He's just beamed away mysteriously. Where's the ship? We don't know. Where did he go to? They were incredibly mysterious. And that's what worked about Section 31 because you couldn't pin them down. But on Discovery, they're out in the open. They have their own special black Federation badge and they have their own ships, and they're just the NSA now. They're just a nuisance, and they're kind of laughable, goofy, supervillain bad guys. Again, mustache twirling villains, and that's what we have on Star Trek Picard. Again, that's what the Federation has now become. They're mustache twirling villains, as you're going to see later on in the episode. So they talk about this secret Section 31 type organization that works within, and it's only like a myth, right? It works within the Tal Shiar, and the Tal Shiar are already a kind of a Section 31 for the Romulans, or they were, right? So they're like a Section 31 within a Section 31. They're called the Jad Vash. And immediately what came to my head was from Doctor Who, the Vashta Narada, right? I don't know why, that just came to my head. They kind of sounded similar. But through the most slipshod logic possible, they just deduce that it's the Jad Vash that's responsible for this. They've no evidence to go on. They just say, oh yeah, it's probably them, whatever. No big deal. Now let's quickly move on to the next scene and the next plot point. Don't think about it too much, dear viewer. And so what happens is Picard and the Romulan lady go to Daj's apartment, and they're trying to look for some clues of communication between Daj and her sister, Soji, to see if they can track down Soji, I guess. And this is just so unbelievably painful. It's so dumb. And this is the thing. Come back to Doctor Who again. Doctor Who, the science in Doctor Who is more fantastical. It is more magic, right? Almost, in a way. You can do almost anything with a sonic screwdriver. But on Star Trek, there are very definitive rules. And the Technobabble has got to sound somewhat realistic and logical. And when Geordie or B'Elanna or Chief O'Brien or whoever was spitting out the Technobabble on the other shows, some of it sounded like garbage or whatever, but there was always an attempt, for the most part, to make it sound as believable as possible. That it wasn't just babble, right? That it was Technobabble that made a kind of sense. But now, so the thing is, the people running Star Trek don't really understand that. They have such a simple, shallow understanding of Star Trek that they know about like level 3 diagnostics and warp cores and plasma conduits and the Federation and warp drives and phasers and photon torpedoes. They have a rough understanding of that, cloaking devices and things like that. But they don't really understand how it worked, and that they think that the science of it all is basically just magic. And I think this scene really shows that, because I think the writers believe that with Technobabble, you can use it as an excuse to basically do the most ridiculous things that just are simply not possible in the Star Trek universe. So they use this technique. The Romulan lady uses this device, this forensics device, and it's a forensic molecular reconstruction. Okay, it sounds about as ridiculous as the fractal neuronic cloning from the first episode. Again, it sounds smart, but actually, when you look into how it works, it's just the most ridiculous thing you could possibly imagine, right? You can't clone Data's entire consciousness and personality from one positron in his brain. That's like saying that you could clone an entire person's personality and their entire brain by using one atom in their brain. It's just daft, absolutely ridiculous. So this Romulan lady fires this device, this energy field comes out, and she moves it around the room, and as she passes over the couch, we see this holographic remnants, this reconstruction, this simulation of Daj and her boyfriend from the first episode, moments before they were attacked, and moments before, obviously, her boyfriend was killed. They're sitting there drinking wine on the couch. So I have to, like, I was watching this, and it was just pure face-palming. I'm going, what is this? What are you seriously suggesting? That there's some kind of energy or particles that are left in the atmosphere or something, right? Everywhere. And that this device can somehow reconstruct them. Effectively, it's some kind of time travel, right? You can rebuild an event that took place in a room in the past. The simulation breaks down, it stops suddenly, and you don't see the Romulan guys coming in the biker helmets. And she says, they've overwritten the particle residual or something, or the residual particle. And it's like, I'm sorry, so much wrong here. First of all, your device has created a holographic simulation of something that was in the room in the past. How? Based on particles that are left there. So I guess human beings are just walking around, leaving particles behind them. And that if you have this device to fire over where they were in the room previously, you can actually reconstruct a visual representation and an audio representation of past conversations. There's like an echo of a past moment in time. This is the kind of thing I would expect to see on Doctor Who, not on Star Trek. Timey-wimey particles must be stuck in the atmosphere, and if we fire this energy thing over them, it reconstructs past conversations that were had in that area from a while ago. What the hell kind of science is this? This makes no sense. What kind of a device is this? This device is way more impressive than any android. Way more impressive than some AI. The lady says the cheeky feckers, because the Romulans cover their tracks or whatever, or the Jad Vash, which she's, again, just jumped to the conclusion that it's a Jad Vash cover-up or something. This secret society that's existed for thousands and thousands of years. Wow. As if that's in any way believable. Why did you say cheeky feckers? Why is this Romulan woman basically, why is she speaking like an Irish woman? Why? Again, with the accents and the use of certain words, it's just, this is not believable. This is not believable as a Star Trek show. Can we please have aliens that sound like aliens? And people say, well, Dave, it's been a decade and a half or whatever, more than a decade since the destruction of Romulus, and there's all these refugees, and they must have gone to Earth, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, but that still doesn't explain why she speaks like an Irish woman. Like, she's been living with Picard in his vineyard for a decade in France. Why is she saying cheeky feckers? How does she pick up colloquialisms from Ireland? Why would her accent change all that much to begin with? I don't know why they're making this stylistic change. I mean, whatever about cool and dude and hell yeah. I mean, that's one thing that I cringe enough at that. But cheeky feckers? Suspension of disbelief, officially gonzo. I just love if she was just more Irish, right? Just lean into it more. Them Jad Vash, they're dirty fuckers. Absolute state of the Talshire. So anyway, there's this really long-winded scene where she's using the computer and she's trying to find out if they can find any correspondence between Daj and Soji, and it goes on and on and on and on and on, and eventually they do, and they deduce completely useless information that Soji is simply off-world, and that's it. And then we go to the Borg cube, which is under Romulan control, and Soji and Narek, who I refer to as Swindon Spock. Hello, I'm a Romulan. I'm a big Manchester United fan because there was a Manchester on Romulus. And we did until Romulus was blown up. It was destroyed by a big, massive, giant explosion of lazy writing. He's there with her in bed, and he's being all mysterious, and they're not saying anything particularly important. And they get dressed, and they go about their day. And again, it's just scene after scene. There's really not much movement happening in the plot. And then so Picard, back in France, then he meets with a doctor who's been looking after him. I think this doctor may have been the doctor on I think there's some reference made to the Stargazer, and he wants to be cleared for duty, to return to active duty. And basically we learn that it's possible that Picard may have Irremotic syndrome, and so that's the point of that scene. And then that goes on quite a bit, and then Picard returns to Starfleet, and what's interesting, he walks into Starfleet headquarters, okay, and he looks up and he sees a holographic projection of the original Enterprise, but I don't want to say the original series Enterprise. He sees the Pike Enterprise from Star Trek Discovery. Okay, it's the Star Trek Discovery design, the 25% different design of Star Trek Discovery. Okay, that's important because it means that this show really isn't canon. Okay, this is not the Enterprise. This is the Enterprise that can be sold under the new license agreement as a toy. Okay. And then it changes to a hologram of the Enterprise D, because that's the member berries. That's individually screen licensed Easter egg, basically, to kind of draw in fans, for them to feel comfortable that this is a genuine Star Trek TNG follow-up. But it's not really the original canon of Star Trek because it operates outside of the original license. It's a new license, and so and that was kind of annoying to me because this is not the NCC 1701 that we know. This particular original ship. This is the Discovery version of the Enterprise, and why does it go from the Discovery Enterprise and then goes to the Enterprise D? The two Enterprises that we know. It doesn't go from the Enterprise A, the Enterprise B, C, or even the E. We just go from the Discovery Enterprise, which is a nod to Star Trek Discovery, and then we go to the Enterprise D. I just thought that was kind of interesting. And I can't wait to hear the inevitable references to Star Trek Discovery in Star Trek Picard. I can just imagine Picard saying something like, "Ah yes, the great Michael Burnham, finest Starfleet officer of all time. Greatest human being that's ever lived. Second only to Jesus. Her missions were required reading at the Academy. She made Ambassador Spock the great man that he became. Without her, Spock would have been a lost emo hipster weirdo. Some say she's now in the future and she's going to save the Federation." So Picard goes over to the desk and he introduces himself to the young man, and he has to state his name and spell his name because the guy's not sure initially who he is or something. And then he looks up his records and he says, welcome back, Admiral. Good to see you up and about, or something like that. And this gag is used, by the way. I've seen it in the trailer of the new James Bond film. It's a very, very similar thing that the James Bond film is doing. Very similar scene to this. So he walks into this Admiral's office and he wants to get reinstated. He explains the story from the first episode about Daj and Bruce Maddox potentially, recreating this pair of synthetic data clones or whatever. And it's a very, very confrontational conversation. She's not happy to see him at all. She's very short with him. Absolutely zero respect for this guy. She has no respect for him whatsoever. I mean, do we need to remind you, dear Admiral, and dear writers of Star Trek, current writers of Star Trek, that Captain Picard, Jean-Luc Picard, is the man who has on countless occasions saved the Federation and humanity. Okay, we'll just give you two examples from two of the Star Trek The Next Generation films. He stopped Shinzon's attack on Earth because Shinzon was going to take the scimitar to Earth under cloak. And in Star Trek First Contact, he stopped the Borg invasion of Earth. The Borg actually went back in time and assimilated Earth. There were 9 billion Borg drones on Earth. Earth had been conquered by the Borg, and he stopped that from happening. Just no respect for the guy. So he goes on to explain the situation to her, and it's this very weird response. She says, "Well, that's not far from all of it. That is all of it." I don't know what the hell. I've watched it a few times, and I don't know what the hell she's supposed to mean by that. She's just trying to shut him down at every point. And yes, like on The Next Generation, Picard had run-ins with admirals, but it was bureaucratic stuff. It wasn't that they had outright contempt for the guy. So he lays out his pitch, and he wants to be reinstated, and he's willing to take a demotion to captain. And then she says, sheer fucking hubris. She says those 3 words. This is not Star Trek. Okay, I officially do not like this show. Okay? I do not like the tone of this show. I do not like the fact that it is no longer a family show. I don't like the themes of this show. I don't like that we have very divisive current year politics from an anti-Trump, anti-Brexit perspective being inserted into the show in such a way that it damages the institution of the Federation, right? To make them isolationist or no longer compassionate towards refugees, right? This is not how the Federation would operate. The Federation were already offering the olive branch to the Romulans at the end of Star Trek Nemesis. It's just unbelievable. And Brexit is not about isolationism. It's about sovereignty. It's about national sovereignty for Britain. And Trump is not this supervillain, madman, despot that the left makes him out to be. So you can see that the Federation are becoming this metaphor for what the left thinks America is becoming under Trump. This current year politics is what the franchise is being tainted with, and it's damaging the Federation. And the Federation was Star Trek. The utopian vision of the Federation was Star Trek, because Federation is humanity at its best, going out into space to boldly go where no man has gone before and seek out new life and new civilizations, and to do so peacefully with all of our problems and baggage of the past resolved. It's utopian, it's idealistic, it's probably never going to happen, but the point is, it was nice, good, family, escapist entertainment, and it was optimistic. This is the exact opposite, and when you invert the institution of the Federation, you undermine Gene Roddenberry's vision. Apparently, several Federation members were going to pull out of the Federation if the Federation didn't let Romulus die. This is just not a decision I think the Federation would ever make, and people have made comparisons with this position and Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, because when Praxis exploded, there were some in the Federation that were like, let them die. But they were diehards, and they didn't speak for all the Federation. And more to the point, things didn't end that way. The situation was resolved, and better minds prevailed. And then Picard says, the Federation does not get to decide if a species lives or dies. And then she replies, yes, we do. We absolutely do. I'm like, okay, again, I'm out. So anyway, she insults him and tells him to go home. And so he heads off rather disgruntled. And then we go back to the Borg cube, and Soji is helping this lady get suited up to go into this area of the Borg cube that's a bit dangerous. And this is where they get this speech from this lecture from this Romulan guy. By the way, I've just found out recently that some of the Romulans on this show are going to wear the bumpy forehead makeup, and then others are not. So some of them are going to look like Vulcans, like Swindon Spock, and the Romulan lady who lives with Picard, and then others are going to look like the Romulans from TNG. So go figure on that one. Apparently there's different types of Romulans in different parts of the planet, I guess. And then we go back to Picard's vineyard, Chateau Picard, and he meets with Jurati, and they don't talk about anything particularly interesting over tea. Basically, she tells him that the memories of Daj were created about 3 years ago. Her whole life was kind of constructed artificially, and they don't really say anything of any use. That scene is felt kind of pointless to me. So basically, Picard tells his two Romulan friends that he's going to go back out there. He's going to go into space and search for Soji, and the Irish Romulan lady is not happy with this, and she drops the tea, and it's like, is this woman literally Mrs. Doyle with some computer skills? Like, go on, ah, you will, you have a cup of tea. So she drops the tea. So Picard meets with this woman who we've seen in the trailers, and she holds him at gunpoint, but as we know, this woman is going to help him get together a team of people to get out there and find Soji. So there's 3 scenes in this episode that could be ripped right out of a Section 31 scene from Star Trek Discovery. Starfleet officers speaking to each other like mustache-twirling supervillains, edgy dialogue, massive antagonism, and psycho serial killer delivery, veiled threats and intimidation. It's all very tiring after a while. So the dialogue is so hackneyed and cliched that it could literally feature in a James Bond movie or any other franchise, right? There's nothing Star Trek about this writing. It's really bad. And just like Discovery, these scenes have lots of lens flare for some reason. So the dialogue is all very, everything is at stake, all this kind of thing. And so one of the officers goes to speak to Narek via a holographic communications technology that we saw in Discovery 100 years earlier. And they're speaking cryptically to try to set up some mystery about what the real agenda is. And I get the sense there's quite a few factions involved, and I just don't care what they're talking about. There's nothing about this that has me on the edge of my seat at all. So that was it. The episode ends, and I just felt that the story didn't really move along very much. And I just got the sense that I didn't really learn very much more that I didn't already know from the first episode. But it did confirm the theory that the Federation really are villains now. And that's extremely disappointing. From the first 2 episodes, I can see a show that's going to be very predictable. It's very derivative. And I don't think the writing is good, and I think there's been some very poor creative choices. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.